What's encouraging as well, though, is that those activities earlier in life do pay off down the road. So middle-aged activity, later life activity before that cognitive decline happens can sort of put some resources in the bank to sort of delay out that cognitive decline.
Hey, what's up? This is Corey Dion Lewis, clinical health coach and host of the Healthy Project podcast. Now, the research shows that social determinants can have a greater impact on your health more than healthcare or lifestyle choices. The purpose of this podcast is to discuss how to improve health and reduce health inequity by speaking to healthcare professionals, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs. Now, if you're enjoying the podcast, give it a review. Or you can also make a donation to the Healthy Project using the link in the description. It takes 30 seconds and it's super easy. Hey, thank you so much for listening. Now let's get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Healthy Project podcast. I am your host, Corey Dion Lewis. I have a great guest with me today. I have Dr. Michelle Voss. She is the Associate Professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at the University of Iowa. Dr. Voss, thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, so before we get into the topic at hand, can you tell the people a little bit about yourself and what gets you up in the morning?
Sure. So yeah, I'm an associate professor in psychological and brain sciences, and I'm lucky enough to be able to have a job to do things along the lines of my personal passion, which is physical activity and how we can maximize our own personal best, whether it be mental health, physical health, performance, any of those lines, and do that, as we age and have a good experience as we get older. So that's really what gets me up in the day, is sort of understanding how we can each maximize sort of our personal best and find our personal best. And in my lab, we get to center the brain in that question in terms of, if we understand how the brain works, how it changes as we get older, then can we understand what we can do to support that function as long as we can. Mm-hmm.
Right. And from what I understand, what you guys are kind of focused on too is how exercise plays a part in brain function and plasticity, and things like that. So can you tell us a little bit more about that work, things you're learning and things like that?
Yeah, so it turns out that one of the best things we can do for our brain as we get older is being physically active. And we look at different research studies that look at how people change their behavior and what that can do to support things like memory that we want to keep as long as possible. That physical activity has the most evidence behind it at this point in terms of behaviors we can do. And so in our lab, we're trying to understand how that works and how it can work differently for different people. And so we're interested in what is it about that movement throughout the day, and what is the role of intensity, for example, because we see intensity of physical activity as sort of at the crux of how we might maximize the benefit for our heart. But also when people think about being active with high intensity, they kind of shy away and might not want to be it might, sort of get in the way of changing our behavior. So if we can kind of understand then what are the key pieces, for example, with intensity, how do we then sort of put that into a behavior change framework to think about, well, now that we know, what parts of our intensity of physical activity are important, how do we sort of think about then changing behavior to keep those key parts in while we're enjoying it, because we know that's important.
Right on. Like you said something very, very important too. Like a lot of people, when they think of cardiovascular activity or any kind of physical activity, is all for heart health. No one ever really thinks, at least who I work with, ever think of brain health or cognitive function for how exercise can help improve that or prevent any loss in that, or kind of keep it together, I guess. What is the effect of exercise on cognitive function? Like, what does that affect? Or what does it
do? Yeah, well, first, one thing you said that's really important is that one thing we know about the brain is that what's good for the heart is good for the brain. So in terms of a behavior change standpoint, it's a great thing to keep in mind that if you're keeping your heart healthy, that is going to be payoff for your brain as you get older. Um, One reason is because one of the things that happens as we get older is the vessels in our brain might get a little stiffer and can't deliver the blood that we need. And physical activity has been shown to sort of maintain that blood flow in the brain in areas that really need it. And so that is one way that was, sort of think how exercise can benefit the ability of the brain to keep functioning. Other things, though, that are less intuitive, I think, are that the idea that physical activity can increase what we call neurotrophic factors that can happen in our blood flow, but also directly they're sort of proteins in the brain that help the neurons in our brain function. So it helps, if we think of the neurons in our brain as sort of plants that have deep roots and bodies that can grow or shrink based on the environment. These neurotrophic factors, like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, are like fertilizer. Like they help the plants grow and they help maintain function or growth even in harsh environments. And lots of studies from animal studies, animal models, and humans have shown that exercise can increase neurotrophic factors, particularly in animals. We can see that actually physically in the brain, especially in areas important for memory, which like the hippocampus. So that's been one piece of evidence I think that's really encouraging, because if we can see a direct effect on the ability of our brain cells to grow and function and connect with themselves to maintain memory, we can kind of see a direct effect of how physical activity could benefit the brain cells themselves. Yeah.
Right. So understanding that diet and exercise are both very important pieces, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this next question is coming from a mindset of, with the people that I serve at Broadlawns, a lot of underserved and most vulnerable populations where proper nutrition, proper diet really are difficult. Like not just because they don't want to eat a healthy diet. It's just difficult financially for them. So this question that asks, understanding that yes, diet and exercise are both very important, but when we're thinking about things people can do to maintain cognitive function, improve their brain health, brain healthy diets versus physical activity, does one have an advantage over the other?
Yeah, it's a really common question. I think really important. In sort of our research, we do sort of study the aspect of nutrition less. In terms of the broader science and what's out there, there are enough studies out there where we can look at the meta-analyses, which are sort of studies that combine data across a lot of different nutritional interventions and look at brain and cognition outcomes. And from those studies, that the Mediterranean diet seems to keep having a lot of evidence in terms of its benefit. There's even a study called DASH, or not a study, but a diet program called DASH that's all about sort of promoting a type of diet that would improve and maintain blood pressure, because again, then blood pressure is such a key aspect of our vascular function that we need to manage to maintain brain health as we get older. And so anything that can sort of bring in the components of the Mediterranean diet, I think, is always a good thing in terms of vegetables, legumes, beans, and sort of limiting the saturated fats. So those types of programs have continued to have a lot of evidence. And then, it's always tough to think about the sort of interactions between the two. There's some studies that have shown that physical activity can weaken the negative effects of high-fat diets. But, ultimately, we hope to see that they're working together, and we want to see that, how could diet help you have more energy to be more active and get more movement in your day, and sort of think about them together. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such it's coming from the experience I have with the patients that I serve is like, I know a lot of the people, when we're talking about the DASH eating plan for those who have hypertension or things like that, it's like, and they're telling me they have $50 in food stamps, or they're really struggling. Exercise is free. So it's like really focusing on that. So it's really trying to figure out what that, understanding there's a balance between the two, you know what I mean? But if someone can at least get some exercise as they're working on their diet, are there some, are they doing that for a good reason? You know what I mean? Is it doing something for them? You know?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, what's important about the exercise trial, the studies that have looked at how exercise can improve cognition and the findings in the brain underneath that cognition is that in those studies, sort of like our studies, I guess, where we don't measure diets per se, then you can think of the benefits as evidence that it's independent of what diet is, because we often in these studies, what happens is participants come in, they're not active, they enroll in a structured program to increase their activity. They're compared to a group that might be less active or not have activity. And then if we see cognitive benefits, we know that independent of all the diets that people are on, we still see those benefits. So that's one way to think about getting that benefit of physical activity with any range of diet that's out there, that we see in our studies that even if we don't control for it, we see benefits. Control for diet.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. So, for someone that's
Mm-hmm.
already experiencing a cognitive decline and they want to join a program or do something, is it one of those things where it's like you're already experiencing and you can't slow that down? Or what kind of things have you experienced with someone that's already going through that decline and they start, a program, a physical exercise program or nutrition? Does that help slow down that process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Thankfully, across the studies, there does seem to be benefit at any stage of cognitive decline. As you get in the later phases of cognitive impairment, the benefits tend to be a little smaller and tend to be more in the sort of mood and and basic function, which is still a win. Um, and so overall, there can be benefits at any stage of cognitive impairment. What's encouraging as well, though, is that those activities earlier in life do pay off down the road. So middle-aged activity, later life activity before that cognitive decline happens can sort of put some resources in the bank to sort of delay out that cognitive decline. Yeah. So the
Right,
benefits do seem to be bigger earlier, in terms of the benefit that you see when people are 50s and 60s is bigger than when they're in their 70s and 80s.
right.
But at the same time, there's benefits at any stage of cognitive impairment as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you touched
Yeah.
on something earlier in the conversation around like when people think of physical activity or, the intensity of it, kind of
Mm-hmm.
say, I'm just going to sit this one out when it comes to intensity.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about exercise requirements to improve cognitive function, are there some
Mm-hmm.
other minimum requirements or what does that look like?
Yeah, yeah. So one thing that's important, I think, for us all to look at is the evidence in terms of how much and how hard. So anything's better than nothing. And so in terms of the how much, the biggest improvements are seen when you go from nothing to getting just even 10, 20 minutes into your week. We even had a study where uh, actually the one group had 4 minutes of higher intensity activity 3 times a week, so 12 minutes a week. And going from inactive to just having that improved their fitness just as much as another group that had, 30 minutes each of those sessions. And so even a little bit makes a big difference. And in terms of, so that's important in terms of finding something that you like. If you
Right,
just get started with a little bit, that still will have benefit for your cognitive outcomes. Um, in terms of how much, then as we look at the guidelines and look across studies of studies, it seems like you can get to good benefits if you get to 150 minutes a week of getting that moderate intensity. But again, there's a lot of benefits underneath that, where you're going from just a little to a little more. Um, and so the key thing is to work up to it and not feel like you have to get there right away to see benefits. Um,
right,
so how long does it take? You asked how long it takes. So there's two ways to think about how long it takes. One is that it's interesting to know that in studies that look at the effects of single sessions of exercise, so This idea, you might get up in the morning, go for a run, and then you feel like you have more focus right after that.
Right.
In studies, when we look at that kind of paradigm, that seems to be the case, that there's this immediate benefit within like the first hour on focus and memory, and anything that might involve like switching your attention to different things. And so it's an immediate benefit. It goes away after a little bit, but it's still there, and it might be a clue that that benefit might persist if we kept doing the exercise over time. So there can be benefits from even single sessions. Then the studies that look across the studies of studies and say, okay, well, what if you compare like 4 weeks of training to 2 years of training? Do you see a bigger benefit? And actually, it's pretty similar from the shorter training to the longer
Really?
training, similar cognitive benefits, which is surprising. We don't know, if people are hitting that new potential, that new baseline quickly and just sort of staying there, and we don't know physically what to change about the program to keep cognitive function improving, or if it's just a principle of what we're changing in the brain. We can do it pretty quickly, and then maintenance is really what's happening over time. So that's something that in our lab we're trying to study, is this time effect, because obviously the quicker you see benefits, that's really rewarding and you want to keep it up.
Okay.
And then just sort of then also, though, have we reached our peak at, when you see benefits that are as big at 4 weeks as they are at 2 years, you wonder if we can do better. And so understanding sort of how we're affecting the brain can help us do that, I think. So
Right. A couple things when I hear that. One is like, it's for me, it's super exciting to know that like your mindset of when you hear exercise, like, oh, I gotta be at the gym for an hour every day. Like no, you can do small things, small steps. Yeah, you might have to utilize some effort, but you can still see some benefits from that. But
mhm.
also it blows my mind how how crazy the brain is and how it works. Like there's so much we know, but there's so much we don't know about it and how it works or what happens. I'm sure working
Mhm.
with that yourself is it kind of keeps you on your toes, and was every day is always it seems like there could be something new.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, totally. There's the brain, in terms of that we have these individual cells that are there that are doing the work and require nutrients from our blood and that blood flow, and that those cells can't do the work on their own, so they have to work in teams or in networks. And so
Right.
what we do in our lab, one of the things that our lab does a lot, is sort of understand this network function and how that enables these cognitive abilities like memory and focus of attention that we want to maintain as long as we can. And putting this together is a massive data problem. And the technologies for imaging the brain and its structure and how these different areas of the brain are working together are continually changing and improving. And so, yeah, it blows my mind when we're working with students and we're just looking at how we can measure the connections of the brain and see it change with an intervention program within a given person. It's so exciting. Yeah, but we have a lot to learn.
Right. So I want to talk about the lab a little bit because I really think that's a really
Uh-huh.
great thing for students who are trying to get into that. When you're doing studies, is it a different study every year, or is it one study that you're focusing on for multiple years? Like how does that work within the lab?
Yeah, it can be a little bit of both. We have, for example, one study we've been running for 4 years now, which
Oh
is
wow.
a training study, an intervention study where participants are inactive before they start the study, which means they're not getting up to an hour of activity that's getting their heart rate up in a week. And then we introduce a structured program, and we are varying the intensity and understanding then, that idea of how much do we gain from higher intensity. And so for that study, participants train for 6 months. And we want to get up to about 120 people. And that takes, over time, we have a couple people each month enroll. And so over 4 years, we sort of keep running the study. And it's exciting to see students come in and learn on the job, so to speak. So they learn about what happens to the brain as people get older. They get to meet participants and learn about what they're experiencing. They get to see how we study it in the scientific sort of paradigm in terms of measuring cognition in the lab with computer-based tasks. So what I love about the research lab is that we get to sort of understand how the brain works and how we could improve it, but we're sort of then sharing that in with students who are learning this information and learning how to generate new ideas and create studies of their own and learn about the community at the same time. So that's an example though of a study that's been 4 years going, and so we're really excited to finish next May. And then there's other studies that can be smaller, so they might be sort of a question that comes up that we can answer by running it within a couple months, and then we'll sort of design the study, enroll participants. A student would lead that type of project, and then we sort of see what we learn, and then we design our next study. So there's a little bit of both, kind of a diversity of portfolio there. Yeah.
Right. Man, I'm so jealous. So when I was at, when I was at the
Oh.
university, when I was at the University of Iowa, I was a research assistant for the Spatial Perception and Memory Lab, and
Uh-huh.
and I called in participants. Like I just like called people. I mailed stuff. I think I did one study, but like
Hmm.
it wasn't enough for me to be like, man, this is really, really cool. It's like, man, I don't want to come back in here and just keep calling participants to come in. It's like, man, now I can hear about these other things. It's like, gosh. But that's so cool they have that at the University of Iowa. But
Yeah, and it's yeah, and every lab's different, which is interesting too. And one thing we're trying to do as a department is help students sort of find what different opportunities are out there and be
mhm.
able to try different research environments or just different problems that research is on, and kind of see what fits or what clicks and gets them excited or not, but still know what
Right.
research what we do with research. um, yeah, because every day we read about studies in the news or sort of hear about a new finding, and having that little bit of even that little bit of experience helps it sink in terms of what it looked like to run that study and think about what the results might mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to get off of
Hmm.
too much of off of the topic, but bringing up just your average person trying to read research. Reading research is hard. Like,
Oh
if
yeah,
you don't know, if
yeah.
you don't know, like it is hard. So yeah, I definitely appreciate that understanding of where to look or what to look for is super important. But but yeah, so my next question, in one that um when I was doing some research before our interview, came up a lot, and it's exercise as the fountain of youth, or
Mm.
exercise taking years off of your life. Things like those were kind of the articles that I was finding, and I was like, okay, this must be a big question people ask or wonder about. And it's what does it mean when people say exercise slows aging or takes time or takes age off of your life or 10 years or whatever the case may be? What does that mean? Is there truth to that, from your
Hmm.
perspective?
Yeah. I think those articles are very exciting when you see the headlines and you're like, oh, yes, I'm looking for this.
Yeah.
um, Yeah, like so if we think about that within the way our studies work, we could think, if we look, for example, there was one study that I was involved in when I was in graduate school where we looked at the impact of 1 year of exercise on the brain and memory. And what we found was that an area of the brain, the hippocampus, which is really important for memory, that it can actually grow over the course of a year when people have exercise introduced to their routine. And this was 150 minutes a week. This is like the standard intervention, 150 minutes a week, keeping your heart rate up. So over the course of that year, the structure in the brain grew about 1 to 2%. And the importance of that is that without the exercise, so the control group that didn't get their heart rate up, but had the same social interactions and presumably actually similar diet, their hippocampus shrunk or grew smaller 1 to 2%.
Hmm.
And so one way to think about that is if we think of the over time, the accumulation of aging can damage tissues, and the brain is no different. So some areas of the brain will shrink, and the connections between those areas start to get damaged or broken off. And so when we think about, at least for us, when we think about how exercise delays or creates the fountain of youth for the brain, we're thinking about slowing that process, so slowing the shrinkage and maintaining the connections and sort of reverting what would otherwise happen at a faster rate with aging. So that's one way we can think about it, is if we think of there's an average rate without activity of negative effects of aging. With physical activity, we're slowing that rate. So we might even just be staying stable. Of course, best case is we're sort of getting higher than we were otherwise in either the volume or function. But we think about rate of decline, and are we kind of having impact on that slope of rate? Yeah.
Right. So if you're 40 years old, you're still 40.
Yeah. You're still 40. You may have the hippocampus of a 30-year-old.
Right. But you are still 40. That's awesome.
But yeah.
Dr. Voss, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I was super excited about this. I think this is a great conversation, and things you're doing are just really, really interesting and awesome. For those that are interested to learn more about you and what you do, or learn more about the lab at the University of Iowa, where can they reach out to you at? Where can they find you?
Yeah. So our lab, we're on Facebook, which is one way we put out information about what we're doing or any new studies that are out there. And so that's the Health Brain Cognition Lab. And then, so that's one place to look. On Twitter, I'm Voss HBC, so my last name with our lab acronym of HBC. And that's where all different studies that are out or different things that are happening in research, or show off some of the stuff our students are doing, and that kind of thing. And in general, then, you can look for us on the Psych Iowa as well. Sort of that's one way to know what the department is doing and sort of where we're interacting with the department. One thing I wanted to share that I'm excited about in terms of something that's happening right now is a study that we've started up in collaboration with the Health and Human Physiology department. And so in that study, it's called the Sleep Move Stand study, and it's a free intervention. It's 8 weeks intervention where participants would get hooked up with a health coach and learn about ways to change physical activity, but also some of those other things that can help us be more physically active, like sleep, and also work on just sitting less to move more. And so that's a study we're excited about because it's student run. And so students are learning again, sort of on the job there, learning how to be health coaches and learning how to assess different aspects of aging. But importantly, it's free and open to anyone that would want to participate. And so they can learn about that on our Facebook page or through the Community Health Collaborative website that's in Health and Human Physiology.
Oh, cool. And when does that start?
So it's starting each semester, since it's run through a class, which I love. Yeah, it's run through a class. So we're enrolling now, and then enrollment would happen probably throughout August for that cohort of the intervention. And then every new academic semester will be a new opportunity for people to enroll. So if you don't make it in this semester, there's always the next semester, and you can reach out to the study team anytime to express interest and learn about it.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I have those links in the description of the episode so people can go to those if they're interested. That's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for having me. This was super fun.
Yes. Thank you so much for being on. Again, thank you. And everyone, thank you for listening to the Healthy Project podcast. I'll highlight you next time.